Welcome, everyone. We'll give folks some time to get loaded in here before we kick off. So just give us a moment and we'll get started. See people loading in. So I'll just kick off here as we are letting folks get connected. But welcome to another HXA webinar. It's great to see so many folks here. My name is Nicole Barbera. I'm the Director of Communications, Marketing, and Events here at Heterodox Academy. And as you can see on the screen today, we have a wonderful panel to discuss the Trump Higher Ed Compact, which has been the talk of higher ed for the past month since it was first proposed at the top of the month. And we're going to get into all sorts of things today, and we have a great variety of perspectives here on the panel, so I'm excited to dive in there. Um, just some housekeeping as folks are coming in, and before we get started, please do follow the HXA way. We're going to do our best to do the HXA way here on the panel, but also please be mindful of the HXA way also in the chat. We do encourage chat side conversations. I can't promise our panelists will see it as we're busy talking, but please do conversate among yourselves. It's one of the benefits of coming to the live event, getting to talk to everyone in the audience. So please do follow the HXA way. We have a few things that we just want to draw your attention to. Please do subscribe to our emails and newsletters if you're not already. It's a great way to stay up to date on new research and content and commentary and events that are coming out of HXA, including a lot of perspectives from the members like we have on this panel today that we include in our weekly bulletin. So subscribing to our emails is the best way to stay up to date with what we're doing here at Heterodox Academy. We do also have our Free the Inquiry Substack. If you are over on Substack, where our staff writes various pieces about different things going on in higher ed related to open inquiry, so you can subscribe there. And of course, and most importantly, if you work in higher education at a college or university in any capacity, please do become a member. Membership is free and you get lots of perks and benefits, including the wonderful community of over 8,000 faculty, staff, and students that are a part of Heterodox Academy. So please do take a few minutes and apply. And the other thing that we have right now is our wonderful Inquisitive quarterly magazine. We have a new open call on the theme of camp. There's lots of ways to address higher education and open inquiry from that perspective. So please do check out our open call that is live right now through January 6th. And finally, please do join us for our next virtual event. It is a pop-up conversation on the newer book, Class Matters. And we're going to be discussing, myself and Richard, his new book on the case for class-based affirmative action in higher education. So that is free and open to everyone. So please feel free to scan and see us in a few weeks or next week, actually, for this event. So hope to see many of you there as well. All right, so today we'll go ahead and get started with this conversation. I just want to briefly introduce our panelists, all of whom are HXA members. So I'll start just on the top of my list here. We have Tom Ginsburg, who is the Leo Spitz Distinguished Service Professor of International Law at the University of Chicago. He focuses on comparative and international law from an interdisciplinary perspective. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the co-host of the Entitled podcast on human rights. He is also the founding faculty director of the Forum for Free Inquiry and Expression and the faculty director of the Malay Center at this for the Study of Institutional and Legal Integrity at the University of Chicago. So welcome, Tom. We also have Anna Krylov, who is the USC Associate's Chair in Natural Sciences and Professor of Chemistry at the University of Southern California. She works in the field of theoretical and computational quantum chemistry. Anna is the president of QChem Inc., one of the world's leading quantum chemistry programs, and an elected member of the International Academy of Quantum Molecular Science, the Academia Europea, and the American Academy of Sciences and Letters, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And Anna was also the recipient of the 2025 HXA Open Inquiry Award for Leadership this past summer. And finally, we have John Zimmerman, who is the Judy and Howard Berkowitz Professor in Education at the University of Pennsylvania. His scholarship is focused broadly on the ways that different peoples have imagined and debated education across time and space. His most recent work examines campus politics in the United States, the teaching of controversial issues in public schools, and the history of college teaching. He is the co-editor of the Histories of American Educational book series at Cornell University Press, and also the history and Philosophy of Education series at the University of Chicago Press. John also received the HXA's Open Inquiry Award for Leadership in 2019. So welcome, all of you. We're excited to have you talk here. And part of the reason that we invited you all here is because you all have been talking about the compact in other forums. So we thought it'd be wonderful to bring you together and to give viewers just kind of an opening stage setting of where you're coming from and your perspective. I'm going to offer each panelist just a few minutes to give us their perspective before we kind of dive into the nitty gritty of the conversation. So, Anna, if you'd like to kick us off with what your take on the compact is.
Oh, well, let me start maybe with an obvious that there are two sides to the compact, two aspects, and we can view it. One aspect is that it can be viewed as aspirational manifesto, and the second aspect that it is a binding agreement with the government, or invitation to be enter binding agreement. And I would like to think about these two aspects separately. And when I think about compact as an aspirational manifesto, I think it's a great document. It articulates noble ideals such as commitment to freedom of speech, to diversity of viewpoints, institutional neutrality, meritocracy, academic excellence. And I agree with about, I don't know, 80% of it. Now, a couple of points I find objectionable, such as position on international students and some others, and fire statement articulated it very well, what is objectionable. So now the compact as a binding agreement with the government to be used as a carrot and stick for federal funding, that's different. This part I disagree with. So I agree with fire statements that, signing compact as is would just further erode autonomy of universities, and that it's objectionable. Now, and yet, so there are two issues that I really struggle, and I want to put them on the table. The first issue is, what do we do with our captured universities that fall short of these simple ideals? And not just ideals, what do we do with universities that are violating the existing laws? You can look at University of Virginia, a legal brief against them to get an idea how far they go. What do we do with departments that became ideological echo chambers, or even worse, intellectual wasteland? So the question I struggle with, given the reality, is reform is possible without outside intervention? The second question I struggle with is that funding is already hostage to various titles that come from restoration of civil rights acts, and to be eligible to receive grants, universities must be in good standing with these titles. And we know that already led to unacceptable erosion of campus climate, think about Title IX excesses. Now, I also want to remind that during Biden administration, federal funding was used to drive DI agenda. And to just get my technical chemistry grant, I had to write DI loyalty oaths and promise all kinds of things to do that weren't related to my research and were purely ideological. So my question is, so what do we do about it? And, I'm against of using science funding to infringe on university autonomy and to drive political agenda. But at the same time, if we agree on this, we should do something about this Title IX and Title VI and Title VII and what's not, to limit the control of universities by any government, not just by this government.
Thanks, Anna. And Tom, you want to let us know what
Thank you.
your perspective is?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for having me on with the panel. I've written a bit on the compact, and I maybe have a more negative reaction than Anna. Obviously, there's some things in there which, are good, things I would like. I'm a big proponent of institutional neutrality. I describe myself as the world's leading Calvinist preacher. But the idea that would be imposed by government sanction strikes me as odd and antithetical in some sense to the values of a free society. There's many things in there which are really rather dangerous. Closed departments which are hostile to conservatives, including fomenting violence against conservatives, that's just hyperbole. I mean, there
Mhm.
are definitely captured departments, obviously, but fomenting violence, sorry. We can't give in to that kind of language or framing of the issue. And of course, who's going to define conservative? Who's going to define which foreign students have anti-American values? Who's going to define, you know, many things, many features there. And this is where I can't avoid looking at it as a legal document. I'm a law professor after all. The most important provision in there is one which says that in the event a university which has signed the compact is found to be in violation, found through what process, we don't know, the benefits will stop immediately for a period of at least a year. So essentially, any university which signed on to this would be putting itself into a kind of scent of government management, which strikes me as basically socialist in character, that they weren't under before. Yes, Title IX was abused by Obama. Yes, Title VI. I mean, we have these things, and they should all be resisted. But the question is, how do we do so? So then the big issue, I think now, first of all, it's amazing that universities did ultimately, eventually, you saw a sort of set of rejections. I don't think this is the end of the story. The administration is going to continue to put pressure. My hope is this, that it's going to act a little bit like tariffs. You know, Trump's basic philosophy with tariffs, I think, is you threaten a lot of tariffs and then you get the country to change some things and then you remove the tariffs. And so that it isn't going to involve an actual institutional takeover, which is inappropriate in a free society, but instead would involve empowering those elements inside universities who have been pushing for reform, empowering the few administrators in our country with a lot of spine who want to shift things in a new direction. And that would be the best possible outcome of it. I mean, from my point of view, universities do need a lot of reform. But the question of how to do it, I just have to draw the line as a proponent of academic freedom from government control. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Tom. And John?
Yeah, so you learn all kinds of new things at HSA, including that Tom Ginsburg is a Calvinist preacher. That was a new one on me. Anyway, I'm grateful to Nicole and everyone else at HXA for staging this and for including me. One of the downsides of going last is you get scooped by your colleagues. And, I agree with almost everything they said. First of all, most of the goals, I think, in the compact are valid, certainly not all of them, including the cap on international students, or the fact that it went ahead and defined gender, which is a highly contested question in our culture. Most of the goals, like containing costs and having a robust exchange of ideas, I think are not only unobjectionable, but necessary. The problem, as Tom Ginsburg said, is the compact would put the government in the position of deciding who was abiding by those, defining terms like, belittling conservatives or even a robust exchange of ideas. And I don't trust the government enough to do that. However, I think that now that many of us have rejected the compact, first of all, we have to be very wary about other schools that might be coerced into accepting it, because, of course, the administration has made noise about that. But most of all, I think we have to be honest about the ways that we have failed to abide by many of the valid principles that are expressed, however ham-handedly, in the compact, especially the robust exchange of ideas. And I would argue that we have not been nearly vigilant enough in abiding by those ideals. It would be too easy to blame the Trump administration for our divergence from them because we were diverging from them well before any of this came about. And I'm also struck by how many of these ideals, in order to fulfill, we need a new compact amongst ourselves, not just about academic freedom and free speech, but also about what's closest to my heart, which is teaching. That is, at the modern university, we haven't put nearly enough premium on teaching as professionals. The reason my book about this subject is called The Amateur Hours, that we professionalize the research function, but we didn't professionalize the teaching function. Our teaching is judged, if at all, by our students, and they're inadequate judges of it. And we must do a much better job of policing ourselves in that way, because so many of the goals of this compact really depend on good teaching. If you want a robust exchange of ideas in your classroom, you need to be a skilled teacher. And if you want to avoid inflating your grades, you need to be a skilled teacher. So I'd like also for us to keep that in mind as we continue the discussion.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to kind of kick us off in a broad question, all of you have touched on this a little bit, but as I've been following the commentary over the last few weeks, it seems that a lot of the pushback is on the form rather than necessarily the substance of the compact. Obviously, Tom, you mentioned, quibbling, from a legal perspective of how are we defining terms, but as all of you have mentioned, in some sense, a lot of the goals are good goals, and many of them, us here at Heterodox Academy share many of those goals, such as institutional neutrality for one. What is your take on that, especially when we look at some polling that has just come out on Monday, and I'll Marisa can drop that public poll in the chat as well. We see that overall Americans are opposed to universities signing the compact. Obviously, when we break it down by political affiliation, it's still only just over half of conservatives think that universities should sign the contract, and that drops off quite severely when we look at liberals and moderates. But what is your kind of response to that, where it's like we should be idealizing these goals, and Anna, you kind of mentioned this, if we look at it as an aspirational manifesto, but is it really the form? It seems like a lot of the arguments are based on academic freedom concerns, federal oversight concerns. Is that an accurate take, or are we missing something, or some other details there that we should consider in terms of problems with the compact that you may see?
And unless
Well,
I'm jumping in, Anna, please. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think yes. So it is a form, and that what Tom said about government exercising undue control over universities is unacceptable. So I agree with that. Now, I like the idea, and I heard it several times already, that this compact should inspire our universities to come out with our own compact and act on it. And I think it's a great idea. And if it materializes, I think that would be really a big step towards restoring trust of American public in higher education without entering into this binding and agreement that will be violating freedom of university autonomy and maybe even academic freedom of the faculty. Now, is this happening though? Do we see any positive change towards this? So far, we didn't see really universities trying to, come with a counter compact and build a coalition and make statements. So I do not know.
Can I
Tom?
jump in on this?
Absolutely.
We always have had a compact. It's an 80-year bargain since Vannevar Bush, that the federal government will provide massive amounts of research money and give overall direction. Universities will compete in order to do that research. And that's been utterly successful, as we all know. It's the greatest university system in the history of the world, to sound very Trumpy. And that has frayed for various reasons. Partly it's frayed as a result of, bad faith political mobilization, but it's also the case that is leveraging, in fact, genuine discontent, and also, of course, discontent from within, which many of us share. And so how do we formulate what is going to be the bargain with society? What is that going to look like? I think part of it is telling the good stories a little more loudly, and there are some. It is partly making sure universities stay in their lane, and this is an institutional neutrality point. But I think part of the reason that we've lost public trust is that we are seen as having, only one set of values and such. If I can very quickly answer a question I saw in the chat just on this very point that Paula asked, what happens when a nonprofit doesn't do what it's supposed to do? If a for-profit corporation isn't following its mandate, the shareholders would sue. You'd have a corrective mechanism. For a nonprofit, it's structured very differently. Trustees are not always a governing board. The governance variation in American universities is extremely broad. John, you probably know a lot more about this than I do. Sometimes they have fiduciary duties, sometimes they're just advisory, just donors and such. So I'm not sure you would sue the trustees, but if a university decided, this higher education thing isn't working out very well, we're going to become a soup kitchen, then the attorney general would get involved perhaps, and you might have, and if they decide to do something that was not related to its original nonprofit usage, they could withdraw the nonprofit status. So that's a kind of, nuclear option at the end of it. What we're really talking about, though, is universities which say they're doing the mission, and then and in my view, what's happened is that we have the legitimacy we built up from decades and decades of discovery, and we just have allowed little bits of that capital to be drawn down for this or that. We're going to do this project. We're going to have this idiot department because it's going to be politically correct. And it's drawing down on a stock of capital that now has been depleted. And we have to think about how to rebuild that. That gets back to the compact mission. And it's going to require a lot of minds to figure out how we build that trust and capital of legitimacy.
I think that's all right. The only thing I'd add is that another part of that compact, in addition to providing research, which we did really well for a really long time, was also sustaining our democracy. That is helping us school citizens. And I think especially at this moment, we can't lose sight of that. I don't believe we've always held true to that ideal too, or I should say either. And I think part of, the new compact we need is a recommitment on all of our parts, that's fundamental to our role. I think many of our colleagues have fallen down on that job. They've ignored it. They don't necessarily see their job as helping produce citizens. It's helping produce, chemists or historians or whatever it might be. But we are, all of us, making citizens. And part of the rationale for the investment in our project was to sustain our democracy. And I really think we need to put that front and center right now.
Anna?
Can I follow up on that? So, yeah, I agree that we are failing with general education. In principle, students are taking some general education classes. And I would like to see some civics education so people understand American system. I would like to see educating young people how to respect First Amendment and engage in substantive discussions in a proper way, how to make democracy work. So we are not doing it. So that's one big failure. Now, to the point of how well we are doing with educating chemists and physicists and biologists, unfortunately, I regret to say we are failing in this domain too, not as dramatically as in educating people for democracy, but the issues also articulated in compacts that really struck a nerve for me is this erosion of academic excellence. And one aspect of it, grade inflation, which became ridiculous, like 3.8 GPA in Harvard. In Brown University, 64% of students are A. Like everyone is way above average. So isn't that great? So, and the result of it that you cannot really trust college transcripts. You have now college graduates, they have A from Harvard or A from USC, and you do not actually know whether you will trust them to be your doctor or your pharmacist or, an engineer. And that's a big problem that we need to address through some educational reform. Maybe you can tell us how to do it because you are a specialist and I'm not. And, I see that we do have lack of incentives both for universities to be tough graders and honest about grades, and also lack of incentives for faculty because, the easiest way to get stellar evaluation is to ungrade your class, give everyone A, and then, students say, it's a great class. I didn't do anything. I got an A, great professor. So I think we need to talk about it and do something here too.
Anna, so the point that you bring up is a good segue to some of a variety of questions that are kind of coming in the chat, and a question that I wanted to bring up to you as well, to all three of you. There's this idea of merit and some inconsistencies that are occurring with the contractors, some at least perceived inconsistencies here, and I'd love to get your take on it. The first is a lot of the university rejection letters for the universities that have rejected the compact state that we already are, value these ideals and we're doing great on the merit front of education. Whereas Anna, you just brought up some, clear issues where that may not be the case. And two questions in the chat also, or in the Q&A box. mention that, there's obviously been an inconsistency in merit in terms of admissions and faculty hiring, especially as it comes to DEI statements that have been really central to hiring and admissions in recent years. And another person brought up, just the inconsistency of the compact praising merit and then promising preferential funding for universities that agree to the compact. So there's this big kind of elephant in the room of merit and a lot of different angles. And I'm curious, Anna, you just shared a little bit on some of the failures of, where we've been failing in merit, but what is your take on kind of any of those angles with merit, whether it be the inconsistency or what the universities are saying that they have already been doing, or just our inconsistency of not prizing merit, however it wants to be defined. So I'm curious of any of your takes on this merit issue that's come up.
I mean, obviously this is a giant conversational riff, and people like Michael Sandel and Daniel Markowitz have written long, long critiques of this thing called meritocracy, and I think what it boils down to, at least for me, is that this is obviously an important ideal, and at the same time, it's also become a way to launder a certain sort of privilege. Um, one of the things I always tell my students is that I was a very good fetus, just outstanding. I didn't just, lie there, sucking on the teat of the nanny state. I pulled myself up by my umbilical cord, and I got born into a rich country with plenty to eat. I got parents who took me all over the world. I earned it, baby, every single thing. And, the students get it, right? They understand how much is not earned. And I think the real problem with meritocracy from the point of view of an educator is it tricks students into thinking that everything they have, they earned. And those, of course, are the real monsters among us, right? The people that actually think that they were good fetuses. But I think we've created a system that in some ways engenders that.
Well, I would disagree with that. I think meritocracy is imperfect in that it's hard to execute it in a perfect way. So that's true. It's true that not everyone has the same start in life, but at the same time, it's a perfect equalizer, best equalizer we have. And departure from meritocracy always leads to trouble. Now, I had very difficult start. I was born in a country that wasn't so appropriate. I didn't speak language that would help me to succeed in a better country. And when we did immigrate, I had, I had to take cleaning jobs before going into the lab to make our ends meet. So it's all, was unfair. My fellow graduate students had perfect language and some family support and financial resources. At the same time, by the end, what matters is that I was recognized by my merit, and I was able to get, to defend my PhD, to be recognized as an expert in the field, get a job, and replacing merit by some shady, social justice calculations, which we see in DI programs, I think ultimately undermines it. So it's a little bit like democracy, right? We can criticize democracy. Democracy is imperfect. There are many ways it can go wrong, but what is the alternative? So in my mind, there is merit is an ideal that we should strive to improve, not to abandon.
I agree. I agree with all of that. I wasn't saying we should discard it, right? I was saying that it's often quite difficult to measure, and none of us are purely the product of our merits.
I would just add one thing, which is, it's the American dream is the American dream. It's why people come to this country, and it's built on the idea of basically class mobility. And the meritocracy, when Harvard and Yale professors are saying we got too much meritocracy, it's an odd thing. What they're really referring to is our lack of class mobility, which is not just the fault of universities. Universities have a role to play, obviously, in facilitating that. I think that kind of intervention, which, by the way, would help people who have suffered racial discrimination as well, we would just do a lot better. It would be more legitimate for a broader base of the society. It might restore some of the grand bargain that we have with ordinary Americans, most of whom, of course, do not have college educations and are not even upper middle class or middle class.
I would love to shift the discussion to a couple questions that are coming in about, what's next. One person asked for you, Tom, following your tariff analogy, if we see the compact as a flawed opening bid, how should universities respond to achieve more sensible reforms? Anna, I know in your pieces that you've written, you said that it would be nice to see, other nonprofits or other organizations or other universities kind of write their own compact and maybe do something in that kind of collaborative, more internal led space. So, Tom, maybe we can start with you since it was directed a little more towards you, but, you know, what do you think should happen next? And I'll add a wrinkle of what happens if someone does sign. I haven't checked the news in a few hours, so unless someone has signed, I know
Yeah.
New College signaled interest this morning, but I don't think an official decision has come in. But what next, and what happens if someone does sign this version?
Let me start on that. What happens? You remember the first thing out of the gate was the University of Texas Board of
Mhm.
Trustees saying, "Yes, we're so honored to sign." Of course, they're not the ones who make the decision, but the reason I have colleagues at Texas, the reason that seemed like a good deal to them is they're already under so many restrictions from the state, right?
Mm.
That it was like free money. Now all of a sudden they have a leg up, which they didn't have before. So I could see some universities signing, but the logic of the system, logic is that they really need a lot of universities to do it to be effective. And I truly believe they don't actually want to destroy all of American higher education. And they know also that they can't go one by one like they've done to Harvard. There's just too many universities and such. So they're looking for kind of a wholesale intervention. And if just one or two schools signs, that doesn't do it. And if no schools sign, they're going to come up with other things. What should happen? Well, Heterodox Academy has been promoting a whole set of reforms for a long time that probably most people on the call think are a good idea. Get rid of diversity statements, move to institutional neutrality. All that is good. We should do all of that. But the real problem I've learned, and I hate to put it this way so crudely, but I think the real problem with higher education is that it's become such a big industry, and we suffer from too many administrators without spines. Too many. What did Thomas Sowell say? Administrators are like a combination of a parrot and a jellyfish because they're spineless and they repeat things. And what this is doing is changing the things you can say. It's going to be very hard to double or triple down on some of the more extreme redistributive things, or the departments which really are truly ideological. So I hope that would happen. And in that sense, maybe the tariff analogy is the right one. But there's no, it's also very hard to get people to be administrators now. It's not a fun job. You're getting it from all sides. And so that's, I suppose, what I worry about most of all, is that we won't have excellent administrators who know how to navigate this very difficult minefield. And that will lead ultimately to a degradation of our institutions. And that's really the biggest fear of all.
Yes, when I was a younger scholar, I thought you were supposed to hate on the administrators, and like fight the man. And now I just have empathy. I mean, really, this must be so hard for you and your family. Like my deepest condolences, because their jobs are thankless. Um, but I do think that their responsibility is try to help us change our culture. I mean, no one's mentioned college costs yet you know, and that's in the compact too. They have this ridiculous line where you have to freeze tuition for 5 years. That is ridiculous on many grounds because it doesn't allow for all the variation between the institutions, but also the compact said you have to limit international students to 15%, and they're mostly full tuition payers. So how do you balance these two things? But be that as it may, like so many things in the compact, the college cost thing is a real thing. And we've also created a situation in our political culture in which what had been really seen as a public good in most parts of the United States became a private one. If you went to Berkeley in the late 60s, your tuition was about $200. Florida State was free because we believed that this was something that states, really mostly, feds a little bit, should finance. And what we did was we made it more or less into a private good where each citizen and their family or their parents is required to navigate it on their own. And I guess what I would say on the question of costs is if we want to change any of that, we have to prove to America that we can do better with what we already have. And I don't think we've even started to do that.
I strongly agree with that, and I also agree with Tom about concerns of the lack of leadership. And I see two big problems in this domain. One is this incredible bureaucratization of American universities that I witnessed developing on exponential scale in the course of my career. So my career is not that long, since 98, I mean, it's long, but the bureaucracy became completely crushing and insane. And bureaucracy costs money. So bureaucracy is not free. So that's one big problem. And here, components are, both university internal aversion to risks and the idea that you need to bureaucratize everything, and also some pressure that comes from the government with all kind of compliances and other things. So now the cost of this bureaucracy then passed down to students, and that's also very well documented that the steep increase in tuition is largely due to increase in cost for administrators. Faculty salaries are pretty flat over the years. Now, I do not know whether it's possible to just change completely how we operate, but I would like to get rid of all this insane bureaucracy and human resources and all this, people that prevent us of doing a good job. Now, with leadership, so let's ask a question. What kind of incentives led to developing this class of administrators that lack these strong leadership skills? What is it that we are doing wrong that somehow people who percolate to the top have this, properties that Thomas so well described so well. Yeah, I think I like this saying very much. So I do not know, but I think something is wrong systemically with how we select our leaders and how we reward them.
I mean, the only thing I'd add here is just as an educator, I think another danger is we're socializing our students to expect administrative solutions. To different problems, right? So, if there's some sort of incident that happens on campus that, maybe involves some racist statements or sexist statements or something else that was highly offensive, we have socialized the students to expect an administrator to settle this matter. And, I think that fundamentally disempowers the students and sends exactly the wrong message about the sort of skills we want them to have. My former student, Jeff Snyder, has a great example. Let's suppose there's a Muslim student and a gay student. And the Muslim student says, I don't believe that there should be gay rights because I think same-sex love is haram or, sinful, taboo. And then in response, the gay student says, well, then you have a crappy religion. Let's suppose both of them call the bias incident response team, which is the administrative solution that we have to this, and say, well, I was insulted. I mean, I think arguably, depending on the context, both of those statements could be insulting. What I don't understand is why we want to empower an administrator or a branch of the administration to settle that dispute between the students. And I think that that's what we've socialized them to expect. And I think that's a huge problem.
I agree. And it,
yeah. Please. Well, I was going to say, look, one of the growth of administration is from a lot of different angles, and partly it's an arms race of services that we're applying. Wow, look at that Penn campus, Duke. Has anyone been to Duke University? Whoa, that's a country club. I want something like that. And then everyone's got to spend more on facilities and administrators to hold the students' hand. So I think there's something market-based in the growth, unfortunately, and of course that leads to higher tuition and such. And so. I don't know exactly what those forces are, but it would be good to look at them. I don't know that we're going to be able to get, let's say University of Chicago fires 2/3 of the administrators and starts charging $50,000 a year. Are people going to say that's where I want to go? I'm not sure. So it's a logic to this that it might be beyond us. The other thing I was going to say is that I think it's important to recognize right now that because John brought up, hate speech kind of thing, or, insults. Your example was fairly mild, but, there really is a huge increase in online harassment and hate speech and stuff like this that the society is undergoing right now, because that's been normalized. We had the election. Now we can say whatever we want. I mean, that's not going to be a conducive environment for learning either. And I think we've got to, our sector has to answer that too. And it's just very challenging, obviously.
Right. Right. And I'd like to imagine that that's a classroom problem, that involves skills that we should be teaching our students, that it's a faculty problem, not an administrator problem. But I think it's been increasingly phrased as the latter rather than the former.
Well,
There's
so I
another.
would like,
Oh, go ahead,
maybe I will
Anna.
just add to it that classroom problem, yes, that's correct. It's true that students are coming to universities with certain expectations because that's how they were brought up in schools and now, but there is also cultural problem at universities, and a big contributor into all these troubles is this culture of safetyism and well-being and belonging that leads to the expectations that there are administrators, there are adults that will make you feel good about yourself and happy and belong, and then that culture, that assumption drives this creation of all these administrative services for students, this expectation that someone will decide and sort out these conflicting claims, and we should somehow get rid of it, because that's something that I do not think people totally affects, but the idea of this culture of safetyism and well-being, I think that hasn't been discussed with at the level of attention it deserves.
In terms of kind of this continuing the solutions and how do we fix these bigger problems, a lot of the solutions that we bring up, being better teaching and kind of reining in the bureaucracy and fixing these large systems, these are long-term things that will take a while for, trust is broken easily, but it takes a while to build back. And a question in the chat is related to something that we've already brought up, but like, should universities draft their own compact so it's more internal led reform? But one of the questions is, before we go ahead and maybe draft another statement, and Tom, maybe you can speak to this, being at University of Chicago, what's already missing from the Chicago Principles, the Calvin Report, these other statements that we have that already articulate strong commitments to the ideals of the university. So is it really, they ask, is the problem really the absence of principles, or is it the failure of implementation? Is it just kind of renewing these other statements? Or obviously, we have to implement things a lot better, but how do we square this idea where we need something that kind of demonstrates we are doing this with the reality that a lot of these changes are going to take a long time to push through?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I do think that principles are very helpful because when a crisis happens, you turn to them. And of course, we've seen a huge, after the Israel-Palestine thing blew up October 7th and such, we saw a ton of universities move to institutional neutrality without a kind of deep commitment to that. It was just like a way of saying, oh, we don't want to speak on this issue, is what it looked like to me when they'd been speaking about lots of other things. And so I don't think that was necessarily maybe adopting a good thing for bad reasons is good. I don't know. But what I worry about is, you can't go without principles. Administrators need guidance, and a university, they shouldn't be the ones to make things up on the fly. An institution has a purpose. It should articulate what that purpose is, what its values are, and boom, you go and it helps you in your hour of need. But remember that they're just principles, and they never help resolve the actual concrete problem in front of you. They just help you sort of reason. And here at the University of Chicago, it's sort of a bit hard to explain to outsiders, but we have debates. If a provost says something and a lot of us think it's violated Calvin, we'll tell her. We don't take it down necessarily. It's just like, okay, that was an error. It's just, and we make errors. Everyone makes errors, but it at least frames an internal conversation, which I think can be very helpful. So I'm a big believer in these principles, but the problem with demanding that they adopt them in exchange for federal funding is they won't be deeply institutionalized. They'll just be somewhere, hey, look, we adopted this, sort of surface compliance. And so I worry a little bit about that. That's why I didn't want them to be imposed.
Well, I think adopting these principles as a first step is a good action, and not many universities adopted the whole trifecta. At USC, we have some sort of institutional neutrality, but it's not as strong as Cowan report. We have some pretty decent free speech statement, but again, not as powerful as Chicago. And we do not have an analog of Schill's report. So I would like to see my university adopting them, but I agree also with Tom that just adopting not enough. First, I think we need to hear an honest reflection from our leadership of what we have done wrong. And that is not coming. When you read these letters in which universities rejected the compact, it's just exercise in hypocrisy. If you read this MIT letter, you would think MIT is such an enlightened university that lives by merit, never had a free speech controversy, and it will be not true. So we need to admit what we've done wrong, and we also need to find a way how to convert these principles into policies, because as Tom said, principles are good, but decisions are made by policies. And policies need to be clear and need to be enforced in a neutral way, content neutral way, and be consistent. And that is not happening too. For example, we have this protests on campus and reactions to administration, to gross acts of violence and vandalism and what's not. It just shows that you can have pretty good student handbook rules, but if no one is punished for violating it, then rules do not exist. So I think that's something that we need to encourage our institutions to become more serious about.
I agree with all that. I think the principles are really important. And to the earlier points, I think it's harder to institutionalize them than to adopt them. The only thing that I would add is, I'm a little uncomfortable with the administrator bashing, although I've engaged in some of it myself, because I think it absolves the faculty at a certain level. One way of thinking about the rise of administrative power is as a kind of surrender on the part of the faculty. That the administrators would not have been able to accrue so much power to themselves if we, the professors, had been more vigilant about minding the store. So we have to be much more vocal and much more organized.
I'm not
And
sure I agree with that, by the
oh,
way. I mean, because, we're populated as we are now. We do have faculty senates and things like that, and that tends to draw the people who are super interested in faculty governance and not necessarily
Yeah.
the best scholars and such. So I don't know. It's hard. It's a puzzle. A genuine governance of universities is really complicated. I have learned, and a puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree with that. I see, given the ideological capture of universities and the disproportionate leverage that action-focused faculty group have, so that creates a big problem of bringing faculty governance to do something useful. Yeah, I do not have solution, but I do see these problems that it's not clear cut. It's not that you can just tell, oh, let's go and all vote in faculty senate and things will become good. It's much harder than that.
Appreciate that. And to get some audience questions in here, we have quite a number. So I'll try to choose some that we can maybe kind of rapid fire here at the end a little bit. So one attendee asked, is it correct to say that many of the compact's goals are admirable, which I think we addressed that already, or is it correct to say that the compact writers are simply co-opting terms that seem agreeable, but which they have very different and specific intentions behind? And I'll just add, I think this kind of plays into some of the polarization of some of the terminology. I'm sure many of us have been following the viewpoint diversity back and forths that have been occurring over the last few weeks in the various higher ed magazines. And there's a lot of different views on what viewpoint diversity specifically means. So I'm curious of your takes on that, if they're just using terms that sound agreeable and the problems of politicizing, some of these basic foundational principles as well.
I can't divine what the people in the Trump administration are thinking. I've been reading not just the compact, but all the executive orders since January. and I think some of them maybe are written by AI. I mean, they're written in the language of a bad undergraduate. So I mean, I think, I think it's really I have clearly the administration believes that it can score political points by invoking these terms. But if the questioner is asking what the administration means by these terms, I have no idea.
Yeah, I would
I
just
think
say,
there was,
go ahead,
no,
Alan.
go ahead.
Well, look, I think I give them more credit. I think they're incredibly talented, political savants, and that the words they're using and the critiques they're putting forward are ones that resonate with ordinary people. Viewpoint diversity, again, it's hard for us to wrestle with even what it is, but we all know there's something there. And the one other thing I would add, and if someone had asked about this in the questions, is foreign students. Now, to anyone who is sort of a real academic, you don't want to know you don't care what country your student is from. But you can imagine it's a pretty good selling point to say, hey, this university is 40%, Chinese or whatever. And that means there's no spots for your kid. And it sort of plays on a, scarcity model when in fact, what's going on is a cross subsidy. So the tuition for Americans is lower. That's a kind of hard story to tell. So I think it's clever politically, and that's why I don't think it's going away.
Yeah, I do not know. I do not like speculating of what people think they want to do. I'm just trying to judge things on their face value. So I think it's clear to me that compact addresses some real concerns of American public, and this recent polls that Heterodox Academy has wrote about today. I just wrote this post, Nicole, by you, right? So very nice summary. It says that 84% of respondents are concerned about free speech on campus. It's a real concern among American public. And 77% respondents concerned about extreme liberal bias on campus. So I think the the language is compact, addresses these concerns. Now, what is motivation? What is underlying goal? I do not know, but it's clearly not just invented out of the blue. It has a real reason to be there.
Yeah. And another question that folks have someone asked is, how, they said great discussion, but how can universities or how should universities respond to the compact other than just rejecting it, which many people are rejecting it on grounds of academic freedom and institutional autonomy and federal oversight being non-aligned with what the goals of the university and how they should function. But other than just rejecting it and then saying, as a lot of the statements, well, we're already doing all these things pretty good. What should they do next? So we reject it and say we're trying to address these things. Then what? We've talked about maybe a different compact within, but anything, especially Anna or John, you guys were at two of the universities that were originally offered the compact. Any thoughts on how your university should respond different, or what universities should do next after they reject it?
Well, look, I'm very gratified that we rejected the compact. I wrote a column urging us to do so. And, earlier in the summer, I also wrote a piece criticizing us for, agreeing to strip the trans female swimmer of her medals in order to kind of claw back money that the Trump administration was essentially extorting from us. So, I'm very glad all that happened, but, I would have liked in the same breath, a recommitment to small L liberal values and especially to the moral formation of young people. That seems to me the fundamental question here. That is our fundamental purpose, I believe, before anything else. I think in different ways we took our eye off that ball. When you survey American families, students and their parents about what makes for a good university, the pole position, the most popular response is good teachers. That's a fact. And I don't believe that we've altered our practices in accord with that fact. And, if you want to understand why so many people hold us in disdain, I think that's a pretty good place to start. When these institutions were created, the moral formation of young human beings was at the very heart of their project. That was their purpose. I understand it's not their only purpose, but I do believe it's their primary one. Um, uh, and in the same breath as we rejected the compact, I would like to see us recommit ourselves to that full square.
Yeah, I was disappointed about our outright rejection. I find Vanderbilt Chancellor response to be most admirable, who rejected both to reject and to sign the compact and said that they will just provide the feedback and will enter the conversation. And I thought that was prudent strategy to discuss. Whether it will result in something better than just walking out of this agreement or not, I do not know, but I thought it was good strategy. Now, about what we can do home at USC, I think there are quite a few local reforms that our university would do well to institute. One is, as I already mentioned, adopting Chicago trifecta and making a clear statement that, we are not doing DEI anymore for real, not just hiding it behind the levels of bureaucracy. I think we should also institute transparency about grades. I think we should be publishing our GPA and publishing all these things that go into it so people know exactly how our grades look like. That will be, it doesn't cost much. Let's just be transparent about it. And I think in the longer term, we should do something about our curricula. As recently there has been studied just a few, maybe a couple of weeks ago, a group, three scientists, they looked into 27 millions of syllabi, and they looked how they were looking for assessing political bias in teaching in three topics. One was Israel-Gaza conflict, another one was ethics of abortion, and the third one was racial injustices in American criminal system. And what they found in this 27 million syllabi, that these topics are taught not just a bias from a biased perspective, from extremely biased one-sided, one point of view perspective. And the authors were shocked themselves. They were surprised. They expected political bias towards the liberal side, but what they found was, cannot even be described by bias. And they say that, it means that students are left blinded to the complexities of these issues. And that's definitely not, part of the things that reduce public trust at universities for good reasons. Because if we do not teach our students the whole, complexity of the key issues that our society is worried, we are not doing good job. So how to deal with that within university? Yes, we have a problem that we have some departments that became echo chambers and so biased themselves that they cannot, maybe they will not be able to reform themselves. But I think we can try to institute review of our curricula and institute also incentives for teaching things in a more broad, from more broad and diverse perspective. So at least we can take some steps. I do not know how long it will take, whether it will be successful, but it's something that every university can engage and attempt to do.
And John, do you have a brief last word before we close?
I agree with everything Anna just said. The only thing that I would add is that nobody has said the word artificial intelligence yet. And, I'm very curious about how the somewhat breathless embrace of AI is going to promote the kind of practices and the values that Anna just articulated. Cal State is the largest university system in the country. It has 460,000 students. Last week, the Times reported that it had entered a big deal with an AI company. And of course, it said that AI was going to promote all the values that Anna just articulated. But one of the things that the Times pointed out was that there's actually no evidence that it's going to do that. I'm not saying it's going to inhibit it. I'm saying we're flying by the seat of our pants. This is why people hate us. Making, this very high profile, heavily monetized deal with a private company, claiming that it's going to do all the good things that Anna said without actually knowing that's true. And this is brought to you by people that put signs on their lawn saying that science is real.
Thanks, John. And we are at the top of the hour, so we do need to wrap up, but I will give each of you just a second to say where folks can find you online to follow what you're talking about as this situation continues to unfold, and lots is still going on in higher ed. So, Tom, do you have a quick place where people can keep up with you?
Well, Chicago Forum for Free Inquiry and Expression. We've got, follow us on Instagram. We've got national things we do as well as very local ones.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. And Anna, where can folks find you?
By email, or I write often for Heterodox STEM, and that's a Substack that I invite all STEM folks to subscribe. And you can also join our Heterodox STEM networking group, or whatever we call it, community. And thanks to Heterodox Academy for helping us to support it.
Thanks, Anna. And John, where can folks find you?
Well, there's this new tool called Google. And if you type my name in there, you'll see that I write for lots of newspapers, especially the Philadelphia Inquirer. And please support your local newspaper.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks for this wonderful discussion. It will be available instantly on YouTube for folks to rewatch. And we hope to see you on November 6th for our next event. So thanks, everyone. John, Anna, Tom, great to have you here.
Thank you.